Hello, everyone, and welcome to Insights in Caribbean Intellectual Property, the official podcast of the Caribbean and America's Intellectual Property Organization. I'm your host, Chris Palmer, along with Janice Keynes. Hey, Janice, good to have you here today. Today, we will be discussing the key elements for the research paper by Dr. Abiola Innes, titled The Making of Policy on Intellectual Property, Innovation, and Technology Within the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, and the International Agenda. So, the Caribbean region has become a fascinating case study in how not to drive innovation. Imagine spending millions on intellectual property workshops while facing existential threats from climate change and food insecurity. Today, we're exploring why well intentioned international aid keeps missing the mark in creating lasting change.
That's such an interesting point about misplaced priorities. What really caught my attention is how these international organizations keep using the same failed approaches decade after decade.
You know what's particularly striking? Take Guyana. They had the weakest intellectual property laws among major Caribbean economies, yet somehow showed the highest levels of innovation in small and medium businesses. It completely contradicts conventional wisdom.
Hmm, that's fascinating. Could it be that we're looking at innovation through the wrong lens when it comes to developing regions?
Well, let me share something that really puts this in perspective. Singapore transformed itself from a developing nation to now being the third richest country in the world. And they did it by committing a fixed percentage of their GDP to science and technology development.
That's exactly the kind of long term thinking that seems to be missing in the Caribbean approach. Instead, they're getting these short term workshops that look good on paper but create no lasting impact.
Right. And here's what makes this so urgent. The Caribbean region is facing serious challenges that require immediate technological solutions. We're talking about food security, climate adaptation, water resources, marine biology. These aren't just nice to have innovations, they're essential for survival.
So, what do you think explains this disconnect between what's needed and what's being offered?
Well, it's like trying to build a house starting with the roof instead of the foundation. These international organizations keep pushing for sophisticated IP protection systems when the basic infrastructure for innovation isn't even in place. And get this, most Caribbean policymakers aren't even using basic tools like think tanks or feasibility studies that their counterparts in developed countries take for granted.
You know, that reminds me of how cell phone technology spread successfully across Africa, but that's more the exception than the rule when it comes to technology adoption in developing regions.
Exactly, and here's where it gets really interesting. There's this ongoing debate about whether we should stop using terms like developed and developing countries and instead talk about technology rich and technology poor countries. But that's really oversimplifying a complex issue.
That's such an important point about oversimplification. It seems like these international organizations are doing the same thing, trying to reduce complex development challenges to simple training programs.
And let me tell you about something even more concerning. There's virtually no empirical research being done about what actually works in the Caribbean context. These organizations keep implementing the same approaches without studying whether they're effective.
Well, that certainly explains why we keep seeing the same failed patterns repeat themselves. How do you think they should be approaching this differently?
I think it starts with understanding that you can't separate innovation policy from the broader development context. Look at countries like the United States, India, or Brazil. They've succeeded by having robust, government funded science programs working alongside private sector innovation.
That's fascinating how those countries have managed to create that public private balance. But don't you think there might be some unique challenges in the Caribbean context?
Oh, absolutely. And that's where the current approach falls short. Instead of trying to copy paste solutions from developed countries, they need to create systems that address their specific challenges and leverage their unique strengths. For instance, did you know that all CARICOM countries have signed on to the TRIPS agreement, but few have actually enacted legislation that incorporates the standards it requires?
That's such a telling detail about the gap between international commitments and local implementation.
And here's what makes this whole situation even more complex. There's this ongoing tension between two competing theories. Some argue that stronger intellectual property rights lead to more innovation, while others say these strict IP rules actually hold developing countries back by preventing them from accessing and adapting existing technologies.
Hmm. It sounds like both sides might have valid points, depending on the specific context and circumstances.
Looking ahead, what's really needed is a complete rethinking of how innovation policy is approached in the Caribbean. Instead of these piecemeal promotional projects, imagine if CARICOM established a regional agency for science and technology development, connecting universities, research institutions, and the private sector.
That kind of comprehensive approach could really make a difference, but it would require a level of coordination and commitment we haven't seen before.
Well, the stakes couldn't be higher. Without meaningful change, these countries risk falling further behind in a world where technology and innovation are increasingly crucial for economic development and even basic survival. The question isn't whether they need to change course, it's whether they'll do it before it's too late.
That's really what it comes down to, isn't it? The future of an entire region hanging in the balance while we keep trying the same failed approaches.
You know what? This whole situation reminds me of that old saying about the definition of insanity: doing the same thing over and over while expecting different results. It's time for a new approach that actually addresses the region's unique challenges and builds on its strengths. Thanks for joining us on today's episode of Insights on Caribbean Intellectual Property. We'd love to hear from you. Please feel free to visit our website at www.kaipo.org or follow our Facebook page. We'll see you soon.